the issue with the WNBA, and I'm going to repeat a mantra. It is the most unlikable league and culture in all of sports by far. And I'm talking from the players to some of the ownership, to all the media members, to the podcasters, to those who defend it. It's the most unlikable league in the whole wide world. And this is just another piece of evidence to support that statement.
The WNBA was supposed to have found its savior, a once-in-a-generation talent, a player who became a household name even before stepping onto a professional court. She was so magnetic that she packed arenas and shattered TV records the moment she arrived. But instead of celebrating her, the league has done the unthinkable and turned its greatest gift into its biggest liability. The truth is harsh, because behind the highlight reels and smiling press conferences lies a league so divided, so consumed by politics, that many now call it the most unlikable culture in all of sports. And this claim doesn't come from critics or rivals. It comes from how they've treated the one person who could have secured their future. Caitlin Clark's decision to walk away from a life-changing multi-million-dollar deal wasn't random. It wasn't the mistake some sports writers rushed to label it, and it wasn't about loyalty to a league that pays her pennies while cashing in on her name. It was something far more calculated, a trap so perfectly designed that the WNBA stepped right into it with eyes wide open. And now they can't find a way out. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the story the league never wanted you to hear. A story of sabotage, hidden agendas, and one star who outsmarted an entire organization. Because what Caitlin Clark just pulled off may not only force the WNBA to answer for its corruption but could also bring the entire system crashing down. To understand the brilliance of Clark's move, you first need to understand the bait, and it was flawless. A brand new league called Unrivaled had entered the scene, co-founded by WNBA stars Breena Stewart and Nafiessa Collier. And when they came knocking on Clark's door, they didn't come empty-handed. They came with what they proudly compared to a Lionel Messi-style offer, not just a contract, but an empire. The numbers alone were staggering. More than $1 million for just 8 to 10 weeks of basketball, which is over 13 times Clark's rookie salary in the WNBA, a laughable $76,535. To put it in perspective, Clark is the reason for sellout crowds, record-breaking TV ratings, and millions in sponsorship revenue for the league, yet she earns less than a mid-level accountant. That's not only unfair, it's downright insulting. But the offer didn't stop at money, because along with the massive paycheck came something even more valuable: equity, ownership, and a real stake in the future of the entire league. For the first time, Caitlin Clark wasn't being treated like a replaceable player. She was being handed the keys to real power, something the WNBA never even considered giving her. Even one of Unrivaled's own founders admitted what everyone else was already thinking: Caitlin Clark was being exploited. They openly said she should be one of the highest paid players in the world simply for the massive numbers she was bringing in. That wasn't speculation, it was a confession, proof that the WNBA was more than happy to use Clark as their marketing tool while refusing to pay her anything close to what she deserved. So when this deal landed on the table, the assumption was obvious. Of course she'd take it. Why wouldn't she? More money, more respect, more freedom. It was the ultimate escape hatch from a league that treated her like an ATM while tossing her pocket change.
Another reason why Caitlin Clark needs to flee the WNBA. It's a political organization. They're not serious about business. They don't care about traditional sports fans. It's a little cult that puts out little political statements, and everybody wears vote t-shirts. They don't care about making money. They don't care really about building up this league and making it profitable. They're a charity. She needs to flee the WNBA and start her own league.
But that's exactly what made her next move so devastating, because instead of grabbing the bait, she walked away. When Caitlin Clark turned down the offer, the sports world froze. This wasn't just surprising, it was unthinkable. Who walks away from $1 million salary and a stake in an entire league? Who rejects financial freedom, ownership, and the chance to escape a system that clearly resents them? The media scrambled to explain it. Some claimed she wanted more rest, others argued she needed to focus on her rookie season, and a few pointed to her endorsement deals, saying she didn't need the extra money. But all of those explanations missed the point. Clark's rejection wasn't about fatigue, endorsements, or loyalty to the WNBA. It was about sending a message. By walking away from what looked like the perfect opportunity, Clark made it clear she wasn't chasing paychecks, she was chasing power. This wasn't a decision of convenience, it was a declaration of war. While the WNBA was caught up in politics, Clark was playing an entirely different game, one that went far beyond basketball. She didn't just reject unrivaled's offer, she turned that rejection into a weapon. She gave up millions in order to shine a spotlight on something much bigger, the broken, hostile system she was stuck in. And that's why her decision worked like a signal flare, because suddenly her story wasn't just about sports anymore. It wasn't about wins, losses, or even salaries. It was about something that drew attention far beyond basketball, something powerful enough to shake the league at its very core. And what was that signal? It was the sound of the federal government stepping in. The moment Caitlin Clark rejected that offer, the story leapt out of the sports pages and into the national spotlight, because suddenly it wasn't just about a superstar passing on money. It became about the growing evidence that she was being targeted, exploited, and silenced inside the very league that depended on her. That's when the federal government got involved. Former White House staffer Sean Mullen publicly called for a federal investigation into the WNBA, claiming Clark was the victim of a textbook hostile work environment. Not just tough play, not just rookie hazing, a systemic campaign of abuse that the league allowed, if not encouraged. And the evidence is damning. In just her first season, she's already been hit with 6 flagrant fouls, a number some veterans don't rack up over an entire career. She's been blindsided by deliberate body checks, shoved to the floor by Kennedy Carter, and taken down hard by Marina Mabrey. 10 games missed. 10 games lost to injuries that should never have happened if the league had actually protected its biggest star. Even her opponents can't deny it anymore. Phoenix Mercury guard Sophie Cunningham came right out and said it: the star player of the league is not being protected. Think about that. Not a fan, not a commentator, but a direct competitor admitting on record that the league is letting its brightest star get battered on purpose. And yet, silence from the top. No real suspensions, no meaningful fines, no public defense of Clark. The WNBA has treated every foul, every shove, every injury as business as usual, while the player responsible for their record-breaking ratings is left to take the hits literally. This is why the accusations of a hostile work environment hit so hard, because it's no longer speculation. The bruises are real, the injuries are real, and the league's failure to act isn't just incompetence, it looks like complicity. But as bad as the physical targeting was, it wasn't the only sign that something deeper was happening. Because the politics didn't stop at the court, they stretched all the way to the Olympic stage. If the hits on the court raised eyebrows, the Olympic snub erased all doubt. What happened there wasn't about performance, it was about politics. Leaked details from veteran journalist Christine Brennan's upcoming book revealed the truth. Caitlin Clark was never going to make the Olympic team, not because she lacked talent. Her stats and impact spoke louder than anything, but because the decision was rigged from the start. Her roster spot was sacrificed as a farewell gift to Diana Taurasi, a legend of the game but a player long past her prime. It wasn't about fielding the best possible team to represent the United States. It was about protecting egos and preserving power. It was about protecting the old guard, rewarding loyalty, and shutting the door on the one player whose stardom threatened to eclipse them all. And the reasoning was even worse than the decision itself. Reports revealed that officials were terrified of the backlash if Clark was included but didn't get enough minutes on the court. Think about that. Rather than risk her popularity overshadowing the veterans, they chose to keep her off the team entirely. She wasn't snubbed because she wasn't good enough. She was snubbed because she was too good, too popular, and too undeniable. The message couldn't have been clearer. This wasn't about competition, it was about control. When Clark's Indiana Fever coach, Christy Sides, delivered the news, Clark's response wasn't anger and it wasn't defeat. It was a warning. She said simply, "They woke a monster." That line wasn't just defiance, it was prophecy. Because the league's attempt to humble her only exposed how fragile their power really was. And once that monster woke, there was no putting it back to sleep. What came next proved not only how much the WNBA needs Caitlin Clark, but how quickly the entire system could collapse without her. For years, the WNBA has brushed off criticism with the same excuse: we're growing. Give us time. That was always the WNBA's excuse. But the moment Caitlin Clark entered the league, that excuse was destroyed. The numbers told a story no spin could cover up. With Clark on the court, the WNBA reached heights it had never seen before. Her games averaged 1.81 million viewers. Arena after arena sold out. Teams were forced to move into bigger venues just to handle the demand. Merchandise sales exploded. For the first time in decades, the WNBA wasn't just showing up on the sports page, it was dominating national headlines. But the second she stepped away, everything collapsed. During the 10 games Clark missed because of injuries, ratings dropped by a staggering 55%. Average viewership fell to just 847,000. That's not a dip. That's a freefall. The kind of collapse that terrifies networks, advertisers, and sponsors. And here's the brutal truth. This league isn't surviving because of the WNBA as a whole. It's surviving because of Caitlin Clark, one player holding up an entire organization. The WNBA knows it. The networks know it. Even her rivals understand it. And yet, instead of protecting her or building the league around the one player who could carry it into the future, they treated her like a burden, a cash machine they could drain without giving her the respect, safety, or influence she had earned. It's not just short-sighted, it's destructive, because the numbers prove it clearly. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA isn't just weaker, it becomes irrelevant. That's why her decision to turn down the $1 million escape wasn't foolish at all. It was calculated. In that moment, she showed that her fight was never about chasing money. It was about something much bigger. She didn't walk away from power, she created it. And that rejection prepared the ground for her most devastating move yet. On the surface, it looked crazy, turning down $1 million, equity in a brand new league, and freedom from the WNBA's politics, but Caitlin Clark still said no. The genius of that choice wasn't in what she lost, it was in what she gained, because this rejection was never about money, it was about leverage. By refusing the unrivaled offer, Clark flipped the entire conversation overnight. She was no longer just another athlete chasing a paycheck. She became the athlete willing to sacrifice millions to make a point. And that point cut straight to the heart of the WNBA, proving that the system is broken and she will not be a part of keeping it alive. Just think about how damaging that was for the league's image. For months, critics had argued that Clark was being used, and for months, fans had begged the league to treat her with the respect she deserved. But it wasn't until she personally turned down $1 million payday that the story exploded. Suddenly, the claims of mistreatment weren't just rumors, they became undeniable, because no athlete walks away from that kind of money unless something much deeper is at stake. Her rejection transformed a quiet controversy into international headlines, turning whispers about a hostile work environment into a roar. The league could no longer dismiss, and it gave weight to the calls for federal intervention. If Clark, the face of the sport, was willing to sacrifice a fortune just to make a statement, then the problem had to be real. With that single move, she changed the narrative completely. She wasn't the victim anymore, she was the executioner. She didn't just turn down Unrivaled's offer, she weaponized it, using her own sacrifice as proof that the fight was never about money, but about breaking a corrupt system. And that's when the second phase of the plan came into play, because just as Clark created the crisis, the WNBA Players Union saw their opening. The impact of Clark's rejection didn't end with headlines, it sparked the perfect storm, and the union wasted no time taking advantage. For years, players had complained quietly about pay, conditions, and respect, but nothing ever changed because the league always held the power. The contracts were locked in until 2027, and management knew the players had no leverage until Caitlin Clark blew the doors wide open. Almost immediately after Clark's rejection became a national headline, the Players Union shocked everyone with a move no one saw coming. They announced they were opting out of the collective bargaining agreement early, tearing apart a deal that was supposed to hold for another 3 years with a single statement. Union President Nneka Agwamike didn't hold back. She called it a defining moment, warning that players could no longer afford to sit still. In other words, patience was over and the gloves were off. And here's the key. This wasn't just coincidence, it was coordination. Clark's sacrifice had handed the union the undeniable proof they needed to demand change. Now they could point directly to her story and say, look, even the biggest star in the league, the one carrying everything on her back, is being exploited. If she isn't protected, if she isn't paid, if she isn't respected, then what chance do the rest of us have? It was the perfect weapon. The union turned Clark's rejection into a rallying cry, using it as justification for their most drastic move yet. And in doing so, they triggered an existential crisis for the WNBA. Because without a collective bargaining agreement, the entire financial structure of the league is now at stake. Revenue sharing, salary caps, endorsements, TV deals, everything is on the table. The players weren't asking anymore, they were demanding. And just like that, the WNBA suddenly found itself trapped under pressure from both sides, federal investigators circling from the outside and a player rebellion rising from the inside. The walls were closing in and panic was spreading fast at league headquarters. For decades, the WNBA operated like a bubble, small, niche, and insulated from real accountability. But Caitlin Clark shattered that illusion, and now the league is trapped in a crisis of its own making. On one side, federal investigators are digging in, armed with accusations of a hostile work environment, possible civil rights violations, and claims that Clark was deliberately targeted. Subpoenas could uncover years of emails, private conversations, and internal policies the league never wanted the public to see. And if even half of the whispers are true, the cover-up may look worse than the abuse itself. On the other side, the players' union is ready to go nuclear, tearing up the collective bargaining agreement and making it clear that if the league doesn't finally give them their fair share, they will shut the entire operation down. That's not a bluff, and it's not a negotiation tactic, it's a warning. That's a declaration of war, and caught in the middle is the very player the league once tried to humble, now holding more power than anyone in its history. Caitlin Clark has shifted from being the WNBA's golden goose to becoming its greatest threat. The very system they built to contain her is now being dismantled by her. Inside league offices, the panic is impossible to hide. Do they admit failure, finally protect their star, and beg for forgiveness? Or do they double down, leaning on media allies to brand Clark as selfish, difficult, even dangerous to the very game she's carrying on her back? Every path forward is a gamble, and none are safe. Because the truth is out, the numbers are undeniable, and the public is watching closely. The league wanted Caitlin Clark to be their savior, but by underestimating her, they may have created their own executioner. The WNBA thought it could control her, that it could profit from her stardom while forcing her into the same broken system as everyone else. But in trying to humble her, they woke something they were never prepared to face. Her rejection of the $1 million unrivaled deal wasn't a mistake. It was a masterstroke. A single sacrifice that turned whispers into headlines, transformed quiet frustration into a player revolt, and forced the federal government to stare directly at the league's darkest secrets. Now, the WNBA stands at a crossroads. On one side are investigations that threaten to expose years of corruption and abuse. On the other, a union rebellion demanding nothing less than a complete financial overhaul. And right in the middle is the player they couldn't silence, the one they need the most, yet the one they tried to break. Caitlin Clark didn't just refuse the bait, she turned it into a weapon. And that weapon now threatens to burn the entire system to the ground. The real question isn't whether the WNBA can weather this storm, it's whether it can survive Caitlin Clark. Because the monster they woke isn't going back to sleep.